I'm Chrissy Seaton and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're continuing on with this marvellous book called Amunah and the Noahide, and it's by Rabbi Lazer Brody. And I want to talk about the subject of blasphemy today. And to do that and to make sure I don't miss any important parts of the text, I'll be reading from some of the pages here today. But let's just have a little look and ask ourselves, well, just briefly, what is blasphemy? Well, our second Noahide commandment warns us about this and prohibits blasphemy. And you can locate that in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. And I will just read that briefly from my text here. And it says, it talks about the prohibition of vain oaths and things like that. And I'll read it. And it says, "You shall not take the name of Hashem, your God, in vain, for Hashem will not absolve anyone who takes his name in vain." So it's very clearly written in the text. And then it goes on with an explanation and says it's forbidden even to utter God's name casually for no valid purpose or reason. So you can imagine when you're using God's name in the text or context of anger and things like that. I mean, that's beyond bad. It's just not acceptable. So let's go on and see what other things we can learn and glean from this. So it is our second commandment, as I said, and it's the third of the 10 commandments for the Jews. It goes on and says, a decent person asks himself, who in his right mind would blaspheme? Who could possibly be so blatantly insolent that they'd curse the Almighty? Well, I'm sure we've all been exposed to people who have blasphemed, and if we were all truthful, there would be times in our own lives where maybe it slipped out as a mark of explanation or so it's just slipped out, and we regret it when that's done. But unfortunately, like everything that comes out of our mouth, we can't really take it back. It's there, it's recorded. So the answer is pretty simple. It says that if a person loses his or her temper, anything can come out of their mouth. Now, that doesn't need any explanation. When people do get angry, some dreadful, dreadful words pour forth out of their mouth. And once it comes out the tongue and through the lips, you can't, unfortunately, gather up those words and make them disappear. They're there. They're on record already with God. So, Book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 9 says, anger lies in the bosom of a fool. And so anger opens the door to so many things that we're not even thinking about or aware of. The sages have said all types of evil forces take control of the angry person. So anger is like a festering carbuncle, and then all that evil underneath the surface, the pus, and erupts out of that stinking carbuncle. And that's what you've got to think of it like. It's just putrid slime, putrid pus coming out. So we go on, and also anger brings us to deny God. Anger takes our mind to thinking of whatever it is that's caused us to be angry and not concentrating on us saying to ourselves, this isn't a pleasant situation. However, how does God expect me to handle this? How am I going to deal with this? You know, a venomous volume of words coming out of your mouth is not going to solve the problem, whatever it is. And it goes on and explains that our sages say that anger is tantamount to idolatry, since evil overwhelms and subjugates the angry individual. Angry people are prone to forget the Torah's explicit commandment, you shall not curse God, and that is in Exodus chapter 22, verse 27. Now, people who blaspheme continually, and we've probably all been exposed to someone that does that. Every second word, or it becomes an exclamation mark almost for them, a punctuation mark for that matter. So it goes on, and we need to understand that we should not blaspheme or curse, because it's a law that not only means we can't blaspheme God, but we shouldn't be blaspheming either people who are acting on behalf of God. That means in courts, the King of Heaven prohibits cursing. He's appointed king on earth. That is, in other words, the spiritual leaders of the generation, meaning the Jewish leaders. It also includes the prohibition against cursing regarding people involved in a Jewish court and the Jewish court itself, and which judges according to the laws of the Torah. And we've talked about this in other videos as well, but in times to come, we need to be aware of that the Jewish courts do and will continue to make, how shall I say, rulings on certain things. At the moment, we rely on the community courts, the courts of the land, etc. But the Jewish courts in times to come will be those making the laws. So there's two instances that the Tanakh talks about in relation to blasphemy, and one involves the son of an Egyptian, and the other one involves Goliath, the giant. But very briefly, Israel spent over 210 years of slavery in Egypt, and it was through a breach of marriage fidelity that a woman from the tribe of Dan gave birth to the son of an Egyptian taskmaster, or a boss, so to speak. And since the tribal lineage according to the father, and therefore asked him to leave, he fought them and cursed Hashem's holy name. They apprehended and incarcerated him, meaning locked him up, until Moses could clarify the young man's verdict. So, in other words, they wouldn't let him join their camp or their tribe because he wasn't. It wasn't the way it should be. So we go on then, and Hashem spoke to Moses, and the reply was, remove the blasphemer and take him outside the camp. Let all who heard him curse lay their hands upon his head. Then the entire congregation shall stone him. Whoever curses God shall bear his sin, suffering a similar fate. And he who blasphemes the name of God shall surely be put to death. And that's quoted in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 10 to 16. So that Egyptian, who had a very crude outlook and hostile character, and he did try to set up a tent in the tribal encampment of Dan, but of course the elders told him no way, and so he was cast from the encampment. The Torahs also, bear in mind, sparing with words, but in the case of the Egyptian's son who blasphemed, it repeatedly stressed the seriousness of this violation. So we should bear that in mind. Now, we've all heard the story of Goliath, and the book of Samuel 1, chapter 17, relates the confrontations between the Philistines and the Israelite armies in the Elah Valley, not far from today's Ramat Bet Shemesh. Now it goes on and says, for 40 days Goliath challenged the Israelites to send out a champion of their own to fight him. And it says, Exodus chapter 31 verse 13, that Goliath uttered double blasphemies. His first claimed that there is no God, and that if there is, let him come down and fight. Now, hearing the 9-foot-tall Goliath roar, the Israelites undoubtedly were a bit nervous about this. They were quite afraid of this. Now, David, who was barely of bar mitzvah age, so he was not quite 13, roundabout, at the time, could not stand hearing Goliath's cursing. So David has an intense love for Hashem, and overcome any trace of fear he might feel and or have for that giant. David said to King Saul, as I killed a lion and a bear, this heathen Philistine shall be as one of them, for he has cursed those who fight for the living God. Now, that's in Samuel 1, chapter 17, verse 26. Now, David confronts Goliath on the battlefield. A slingshot and 5 smooth stones. That was his weaponry. Goliath now curses David, and David replies, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, whom you have cursed. And of course, we know the outcome. All the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that God saves not with the sword and the spear, for the battle is God's, and he will give you into our hands. So that the faith of that statement. So then David actually hurled the stone, placed it in the slingshot, hurled a stone that then struck Goliath right between the eyes. It was a bullseye hit. I mean, the most dangerous place you can hit someone is there. So it was a bullseye shot, and that sent that evil giant crashing down dead when he hit the ground. So, again, we understand that story and also understand the faith of David and the sheer arrogance and blasphemy and evil. When the two come together, what happened? David was victorious, wasn't he? So we're taught that anger is worse than almost any other transgression. It's an evil deed, and it tarnishes our divine soul. And I think that's what we need to remind ourselves. Look, it's easy to get cross with things. It's an easy thing to go, and all sorts of bad words come out. And, but, to blaspheme and things like that, you're opening a door to stuff that you don't want in your life. There are evil forces out there. Don't kid yourself, it doesn't exist. It's there. Evil is looking for the slightest crack in your armour so it can seep in. So we go on now. It says that the anger causes the divine soul to leave the domains of the angry person altogether. All right? So we're obligated to uproot the root of blasphemy, which is none other than anger and arrogance, both of which our sages compare to idolatry. Excuse me. So we've got a clear picture developing here, haven't we? It further goes on and explains when a person's divine soul picks up and leaves an impure soul from the nether spiritual world, meaning the unknown outer world, the dark side enters the person. So if you get angry and you blaspheme and everything, then the divine part of our soul can't tolerate that. And so we're allowing a gap for the evil to come in. Now, an angry person severs himself from God and holiness and places himself under the regime of the evil forces. Then he or she is prone to extreme anger, which unfortunately manifests itself in profanity and even blasphemy. So can you see that vicious circle developing? Goes on and says, a moment of unleashed anger can destroy the spiritual gains of months and even years. So anger opens the gateway for so many things that aren't good for us and certainly aren't healthy for the soul. It goes on and says, one moment of anger can destroy a person, triggering the worst profanity, even blasphemy. Heaven forbid, it says. So, you know, it all sorts of things. I'm sure you all understand what I'm talking about, that, you know, you know of a situation where this is developed. An angry person, goes on and says, is spiritually similar to a dead body, since both are devoid of a divine soul. Therefore, atoning for anger is more difficult than atoning for other serious misdeeds. Now, let that sink in. Let it sink in. How often have we heard an angry person utter the divine name in vain? And I think that is one of the things that people do even early in their stage of anger. They start blaspheming, blasphemy, and other dreadful things. They come out of their mouth. And that is something that we have to guard against. We have to be careful of. And it's something we should teach our children too. It starts in little ways, inappropriate words, things like that. And then before you know it, you hear teenagers using God's name in vain, etc. All sorts of mayhem happens then. So we've been told enough times. We should know it's wrong. It's like denying God's existence when you say his name in vain, when you blaspheme. It's just not, how shall I say? It's not appropriate to come out of a sane thinking person's mouth. If you've got a modicum of common sense, it should tell us that that is the wrong thing to do. You think of your own father's name, your own father's first name. Imagine if you started using his name as a version of a blasphemy or a wrong, you know, it'd be an insult to your father's name, let alone his character, wouldn't it? Just think about it in those terms. How could you associate your own father, your loving father's name, and use it as a curse word, a swear word or something? Because that's what we're doing when we blaspheme Hashem's name. And I can only imagine how that must upset him and others, and the consequences that can happen to us as a result of it. So we really do have to be careful and be conscious of these things. In the meantime, please take care and God bless.